Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
So, let's talk. Cats, dogs, food. We've had a nice 24, 36 hours of laughs and shares of memes, et cetera, and so on. There's been plenty of talk about the outlandishness of Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, paying an ounce of attention to hearsay on the thought of Haitian refugees being accused of kidnapping cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio, and eating them. It's racist at its core. It's ignorant at its core. It's not even anything new under the sun in American history. We've had these sort of tropes, these underlying isms bubbling up under the surface many times before. Anytime a new wave of insert nation refugees comes into this country, there's the unknowing, not knowing, I guess we would say, cultural pushback. They eat what? They worship who? They wear what? It's a story that's been told time and time again, and it's unfolding before our very eyes here in a political environment. I don't know how many of you watched Newsnight with Abby Phillip. I happen to like her a lot. I'm going to be honest with you. I was a little late to the Abby Phillip and Caitlin Collins show. I was like, who are these young women? And they're so good at what they do. It's very captivating. I just happened to be watching last night. There's absolutely nothing on TV right now. By the way, I am watching Bad Monkey on Apple TV Plus. And yes, Vince Vaughn is the same character in every role he ever does. But I actually like this show. Anyway, I got all caught up on Bad Monkey, so I literally had nothing to watch. The Braves, I think, had already lost. I'm not so sure they're going to make the playoffs. Anyway, I'm watching Abby Phillip, and I watched this entire conversation unfold. And of course, you know, there's the foil. Here, I think here's what I was drawn by. Nina Turner was on, and Nina now is wearing contacts. She's not wearing glasses. I didn't recognize her at first. Anna Navarro was on and was just as animated as we know Anna gets. We've seen her on The View many times. Scott Jennings is the resident conservative pundit, always at the table on that show. And they wandered into the cat-dog Haitian refugee conversation, and I want to let you listen in on a good bit of that, and then we'll weigh in.
I think, and you heard it in Vance's clip, I do think it's a legitimate conversation to have about the societal, public safety, health impacts anytime cities or communities get drastically changed because of our immigration system, whether that's in Springfield, whether that's on the border with Mexico, whether that's New York City, which has had issues. So I don't think that's an illegitimate conversation to have. Even in your answer, obviously you don't agree with where Trump is on it. You admitted there are health impacts and that there have been public safety impacts. Those are not illegitimate. Those are not illegitimate conversations to have. And I think people in communities all across this country are having them. Now, whether we have them responsibly or flippantly, or whether we have them seriously, is the real question.
Yesterday, when he said that, he wasn't being sarcastic, he wasn't being hyperbolic. He was amplifying a conspiracy theory that I think you would agree puts a target on the back of Haitian immigrants, and that it is based on racism. Would you agree on that?
Anti-black racism will be more pointed.
Do you think that if there were 20,000 Scandinavians that had been sent to Springfield, people would be saying that they're eating cats and dogs and geese?
I'm not going to answer for him.
Why not?
for his memes or anything else. But I am
No, but I'm asking you, do you think that conspiracy is based on racism?
Because
I mean, it's an
because I'm not going to answer. I don't know. I don't know.
That was a long pause, Scott. I mean,
because I don't know the answer, and I'm not going to sit here and answer for somebody. I don't talk to Donald Trump about what the motivations are, and I don't answer to you either.
But Scott, what is the answer for you?
But the bottom line is,
he's trying to give you a thoughtful answer.
But the bottom line is, immigration is a top 2 issue in this election. It must be discussed. And we're either going to go down a rabbit hole here, which is not the real issue, or we're going to talk about the real issues in which communities, cities, whatever, are dealing with real societal and policy impacts.
The reason we are going down the rabbit hole is because the man you support is making us go down that rabbit hole.
Right.
The reason we're not talking about the legitimate issues you have brought up is because he is claiming, with no facts, that Haitian migrants are eating pets. And that is a dangerous conspiracy theory to be spreading to America.
And actually, earlier, again, on CNN, Caitlin Collins had Representative Ilhan Omar, who has been a target of racist rhetoric and attacks from not just MAGA, but from Donald Trump himself over the years. Anyway, Ilhan Omar was on with Caitlin Collins discussing the very same thing. And I find her insights to be somewhat interesting because she was not born in the United States. She is from Somalia. She knows what it's like to be foreign in this country, to be viewed as, quote, foreign by a white majority in this country, and to have either preconceived notions or leaps and presumptions about her culture, what she wears, what she eats. Anyway, here is that conversation.
It's obviously a much more complicated and nuanced picture than what the Trump-Vance campaign are painting about what's happening in Springfield. But when you hear a false claim like that amplified to nearly 70 million people, do you worry about what it means for the Haitian refugees who are living in places like that?
Well, first, I want to say just the insanity of having a senator, a candidate for vice president, and a former president, and now a candidate for president, really talking about memeing into reality a racist conspiracy, dangerous story like this. What it means is that there are so many people now who are looking for stories to make this true. And it gins up this dangerous reaction by folks who are unstable, in which then they go and try to protect these animals that they think that are being attacked by Haitian immigrants and cause harm to people who are already vulnerable, who came to this country seeking stability and safety and coming from situations that were already volatile. And I think, when we think about the bigger picture, is thinking about what kind of country do we want to be, right? Is this the kind of rhetoric and messaging that we want the world to see about who our leaders are and those, that could potentially be elected into the highest leadership in our office and in our country? And I think what Harris did so well last night was remind the American people that this manic, dangerous liar cannot be reelected as President of the United States, and how crucial it is for us not to go back to the dark and dangerous days of the Trump presidency.
And by the way, on the very same program later on, a Trump surrogate, Senator Bill Hagerty from Tennessee, who is being touted as a potential cabinet member for a second Trump presidency, was asked to weigh in on the very same conversation. I can't believe we're sitting here talking about eating cats and dogs. That's literally where this presidential race has centered now for the last 36 hours on, do Haitian immigrants eat cats and dogs? Is there any validity to that? There's no validity to this. We can't find anyone in Springfield, Ohio, who will speak to this. And yet Senator Bill Hagerty, a U.S. senator, we only have 100 of those in the United States, a sitting U.S. senator, a Trump surrogate, is now 2 of the 100 senators to give any validity whatsoever to an unfounded claim of Haitian immigrants barbecuing cats and dogs in a town park. Anyway, here he was on the very same show, Caitlin Collins quizzing him last night on CNN.
One of the fact checks, though, had to be about the Haitian immigrants. Do you believe that he should not have waded into that, given officials in that city say there's no evidence of it?
You talk about evidence. I've heard conflicting reports. There's conflicting evidence. There's a lot of information on the internet that this is happening. But here's the real problem.
Yeah, but no real credible evidence.
Here's the credible evidence. In Springfield, Ohio, the governor is sending in state troopers and millions of dollars to deal with a problem that's happening across America. I mean, the question is, have you been into an emergency room lately? Have you tried to find a teacher that can teach English as a second language in a school? We have these problems in my home state of Tennessee thanks to this flow of over 10 million illegal migrants that have flooded this country under border czar Kamala Harris's watch.
Well, and it's a fair point in the sense of we've heard from city officials who say school systems are being overwhelmed, hospitals are being overwhelmed. We have not heard from one city official who said that Haitian immigrants are abducting pets or doing that. And, I was thinking...
City officials aren't the only source. There are plenty of people who are saying this is happening. So I think it just needs to be verified. But the real point here is that
immigrants... multiple people there, the police commissioner, people there who've said that there's just no evidence of it. But
immigrants have collapsed that city. Why is the governor sending state troopers in and millions of dollars?
Well, he's complaining that the federal government, Congress, is not doing more to help them in this need and sending in that money. But I do want to ask you about something because...
I would just take one extra point on that because the answer isn't the Congress right here. The answer is the executive branch. The Biden administration came in when Kamala Harris's border czar in the first 100 days issued 94 executive orders tearing down the most secure border that we had under President Trump. That, in fact, brought this flow of illegal migrants that is causing the problem in Springfield, Ohio, and in my home state as well.
I think immigration is a fair point, but I think a false claim is what people had an issue with.
And honestly, Caitlin, that's not the one false claim that Bill Hagerty was repeating there. That's not even the one false claim. First of all, Kamala Harris was never named a border czar. He knows that. He also knows because he sat there and listened to this very speech that Joe Biden gave just 2 months after being sworn into office, that Joe Biden, 2 months after being sworn into office, convened a joint session of Congress, a State of the Union address of sorts, and in that address asked Congress for comprehensive immigration reform. And Congress being Congress, Republicans being Republicans, the use of the filibuster, control of the House and or Senate, depending on what point in time you want to point to the Biden presidency, didn't bring anything forth. Senator Bill Hagerty, also one of the senators who balked at immigration reform earlier this year when it was being brought from the House to the Senate, because one Donald John Trump said, "No, I need you to park that, save that for when I'm president so that I can have credit for that." Oh, yeah, and run for office using immigration as a cudgel. Senator Bill Hagerty, one of those senators who said, "Sir, yes, sir, I'll do that, sir. By the way, you got a little something on your boot there." Anyhow, let's get back to the eating cats and dogs nonsense. Major Garrett on CBS News this morning had Governor Mike DeWine of Ohio, no liberal, Republican Governor Mike DeWine of Ohio on, to validate or not what Senator Bill Hagerty, Senator J.D. Vance, and former President Donald Trump have heard on the internet or saw on television.
Never thought I would ask you a question like this. Is anyone with undocumented status in Ohio, is any legal citizen resident of Ohio eating dogs or cats illegally?
Well, Major, this is something that came up on the internet, and the internet can be quite crazy sometimes. And look, the mayor, Mayor Rue of Springfield, says no, there's no truth in that. They have no evidence of that at all. So I think we go with what the mayor says. He knows his city.
If you listen carefully, you can hear Major Garrett laughing as he awaits an answer on a stupid question.
Well, Major, this is something that came up on the internet.
All right, so since we're going to judge people on what they do or don't, or maybe do or don't eat, let's actually cast some aspersions on some absolutely crazy people are allowed to eat, because there are no laws against what they eat. In many U.S. states, including the state of Ohio, I mean, I lived in Louisiana, y'all. They used to let school out for the first day of squirrel hunting season. I shit you not. Anyway, stand by. I will share with you some really gross crap that people do eat and are allowed to eat by law in several U.S. states. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio and Progressive Voices via TuneIn. So when listening to The Ron Show, understand the goal is not to gross you out. You may be listening while having breakfast on the way to work. You may be listening 9 to 10 a.m. on America One Radio or 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio when people tend to maybe eat something. Or maybe 7 to 8 p.m. on Progressive Voices. That might be a little late for dinner. It might be prime dinner time while you're watching Wheel in Jeopardy. I don't know. The goal, obviously, again, not to gross you out. But since we're talking about strange things that cultures eat, it's time to maybe cast an eye on strange things that Americans eat. And honestly, this isn't like a chitlins or a Spam thing, although we could talk about that. That's pretty gross stuff. Pig intestines. We're talking about Rocky Mountain oysters. You know what those are? The little danglies between the legs of the male sheep or pig. I just kind of thought I would share with you some of the stranger, I guess, roadkill laws or lack thereof in several American states. Like literally roadkill. And it's not even like you hit the animal. You could have just happened upon the animal. Who's to know, really? Who's to know if there are no restrictions on you picking up some roadside dead critter and taking it home? States like Arkansas, where there's no restrictions. States like, Ohio, where there are no restrictions. States like Georgia, where a native species may be kept. State officials, however, must be notified about roadkill black bear. Not to say that you can't eat the black bear, you just got to let the state know you found a dead black bear on the road. Yeah, that's legal in these United States. In Pennsylvania, you must report the roadkill incident to the State Game Commission within 24 hours in order to keep the animal. Tennessee, where Bill Haggerty's from, the senator we just heard from earlier last night on CNN with Caitlin Collins. In Tennessee, no restrictions. You find it on the side of the road, it's dead, you take it home. Doesn't matter what it is. West Virginia, you have to report the roadkill within 12 hours of collection. However, no restriction. Want to take it home? Want to throw it over the spit? Have at it. And listen, can I just tell you, my very first paying job was working at what is essentially like an IGA grocery, like a rural grocery store. It wasn't IGA at the time, but it was an independent small chain of grocery stores outside Augusta, Georgia. Gurley's Supermarkets. Man, when Gurley's finally opened a supermarket in my hometown, we were excited because it was the only supermarket we had in that town. It was the first sign that little Grovetown, Georgia was kind of growing up. And yet the things I saw for sale in that meat department and on shelves in that little rural grocery store, a little shocking. I remember seeing my first whole hog head wrapped and just sitting there on the shelf. And I asked the meat guy, I'm like, what do people eat of that? And he said, all of it. I'm staring at eyeballs. There's brain in there. They eat all of it. Pickled pig's feet. Yes, somebody eats that. Not this somebody, but somebody. Now, this undercurrent of racism that's being triggered by the whole cat-dog conversation, yeah, we're having a fun time with it, and the memes are hilarious, etc. People are sending them to me left and right in DMs. But let's be clear.
Honestly, I think it's a tragedy that we have someone who wants to be president who has consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide the American people.
Yes.
I do believe that the vast majority of us know that we have so much more in common than what separates us, and we don't want this kind of approach that is just constantly trying to divide us, and especially by race. And let's remember how Donald Trump started. He was he owned buildings, and he was investigated because he refused to rent property to black families.
He and his father.
Let's remember, this is the same individual who took out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for the execution of 5 young Black and Latino boys who were innocent, the Central Park 5.
Has yet to apologize.
Took out a full-page ad calling for their execution. This is the same individual who spread birther lies about the first Black president of the United States.
Fact.
And I think the American people want better than that, want better than this, want someone who understands, as I do, I travel our country. We see in each other a friend. We see in each other a neighbor. We don't want a leader who is constantly trying to have Americans point their fingers at each other. I meet with people all the time who tell me, can we please just have discourse about how we're going to invest in the aspirations and the ambitions and the dreams of the American people? Knowing that regardless of people's color or the language their grandmother speaks, we all have the same dreams and aspirations and want a president who invests in those, not in hate and division.
But that's all Donald Trump knows. It's what got him where he was from 2017 to 2021. Back after this, The Ron Show on America One Radio and Progressive Voices.
Want to be on the show? Have a cause or campaign you'd like to speak up for? Email Ron at ronshowatl.com or call 404-919-2725. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
The Associated Press reporting that we may actually see a little movement on the right when it comes to gun laws and, of course, access to mental health. The Associated Press reporting here, Jeff Amy and Charlotte Kremen with the Associated Press writes, Georgia State House Speaker says lawmakers in 2025 will consider new policies to foster student mental health, detect guns, and encourage people to safely store guns after a school shooting killed 4 at a high school northeast of Atlanta. That school, of course, Appalachian High School, Winder, Georgia, Barrow County. Republican John Burns of Newington is stopping short, though, of Democratic demands that include universal background checks, a mandate to safely lock up guns, and a red flag law letting the state temporarily take guns from someone in crisis. You know, the actual common sense that needs to happen to prevent shootings like Appalachia. His proposals, and I'll read them to you. I've failed to see where they would have prevented the Appalachia shooting, but it's a step, right? The proposals made Thursday by Burns are the first policy response to the September 4th shooting at Appalachia High School in Winder. I would add, from the Republican Party, because they're not the first policy response to that shooting. Well, actually, I guess maybe they are, because the policy response the Democrats have offered, they've been offering. They predate the Appalachia shooting. The Associated Press reporting continues. The gambit by the Republican leader comes as he tries to protect his party's 102 to 78 majority in the state house in November's elections. Well, that's cute. I mean, it's gerrymandered. There's no way that that's going to get flipped. Arguments over gun policy could influence a handful of competitive seats in Atlanta's northern suburbs, including 3 held by Republican incumbents. While House Republicans have already made significant investments to strengthen security in our schools, Burns writes, increase access to mental health care, and keep our students safe, I am committed to not only continuing this work, but pursuing additional policies that help ensure a tragedy like this never happens in our state again, he writes. It's unclear what response other top Republicans, including Governor Brian Kemp and Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, will desire. Kemp calling the shooting, quote, our worst nightmare, hours after the deaths of teachers Richard Aspinwall, Christina Irami, students Mason Schimmerhorn, and Christian Angelo, both 14. 9 others were injured, 7 of them shot. Democrats have been slamming Republicans, arguing the shooting is an outgrowth of the GOP loosening Georgia gun laws. What makes this more devastating than it already is knowing that we had the policy tools to prevent this tragedy from ever happening in the first place. Those are the words of Representative Syra Draper Friday, as she and fellow Democrats demanded a special legislative session on gun violence. That, by the way, that press conference that they held, I will say again, Georgia Democratic Party, you have a Georgia House Democrats YouTube page, Senate Democrats YouTube page, you have your own YouTube page, you have all these social media channels, and the video. Where's the video of this? She continues, however, and that we did not use them because my Republican colleagues chose to gamble with our children's lives rather than face the wrath of the gun lobby. She's not wrong. Back to the reporting here. Investigators say the shooting was carried out by 14-year-old Colt Gray, charged as an adult with 4 counts of murder. Authorities charged his 54-year-old father, Colin Gray, we all know this story, with second-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, and cruelty to children. Investigators allege Colin Gray gave his son access to a semi-automatic AR-15 style rifle when he knew the teen was a danger to himself and others. So back to Speaker Burns. Burns says he wants to consider information sharing among police, school, and mental health workers, a nod to the fact that Colt and Colin Gray were questioned in 2023 by a Jackson County Sheriff's deputy over an online post threatening a school shooting. Jackson County Sheriff Janice Mangum said her office didn't find enough evidence to bring charges. It's unclear if Colt Gray's earlier schools were notified about the threats. Burns wrote, "We are aware that a breakdown in communication between school systems and law enforcement officials allowed the shooter's prior history to slip through the cracks upon his transfer to Appalachian High School." You know, it's funny that we have this conversation about this lapse in communication on the anniversary of 9/11 because that actually did contribute so much between our intelligence agencies, the lapse in communication and firewalls of sharing information is in large part why 9/11 slipped through the cracks, why the planning for that slipped through the cracks. So he's not wrong in that realm. That's something that probably should be better shored up, I would say. The article continues. The speaker also said he wants to expand mental health care for students. Great. But that's going to require additional funding, right? We're going to have to offer resources for schools. And maybe, I don't know, just spitballing here, maybe also law enforcement. I know that those on the right have been howling like scalded dogs about defunding the police when actually what activists have been calling for is funding of mental wellness staffers in law enforcement, because having officers who have had 6 to 16, I don't know how many weeks you go to police academy, it's less than a year. There are some who go to college and get a degree, a law enforcement degree of some sort, various sorts. I get that. There are some who are, more aspirational and are going to go higher in rank because of that college degree. But by and large, the officer that shows up at your door went to a police academy that took a year or less to graduate from and doesn't come with much more than a flyover of, well, here's what crazy looks like and here's what you should do in that academy. Yeah, no, I 1,000% agree with Republicans. Yes, we should discuss expanding mental health care for students and in law enforcement. Anyway, the state's voluntary APEX program steers students toward counseling. The program covered 540,000 of Georgia's 1.75 million students in 2022-2023, about 31%, the article writes. Burns also wants to examine ways to catch guns before they enter schools. Some schools are using camera systems and artificial intelligence to try and detect guns instead of metal detectors. The speaker proposes increasing penalties for threats against schools, saying he wants to crack down on copycat threats seen since the shooting. Oh, that reminds me, locally, we're dealing with something like that. Here's from WAGA Fox 5 in Atlanta.
Well, many schools in our area have received threats ever since the Appalachian school shooting. And while many have been debunked, school and law enforcement officials are not taking any chances.
And that is welcome news to many parents. Good Day's Brooke Zahner is live in Atlanta for us this morning. Brooke, students and staff there will see increased security today.
Yeah, and that, of course, comes after a string of threats that have come into Atlanta public school officials. They are also taking them very seriously, and as a result, they are going to have an increased security law enforcement presence across the board. They say they're working with the Fulton County Sheriff's Office along with Atlanta police to make that happen. But this, unfortunately, has just been a theme that we have seen since that horrible shooting at Appalachian High School. Authorities say they have investigated hundreds of social media threats, and so far, at least least 11 people ranging in ages from 12 to 26 have been arrested across several different counties for making threats online or for spreading false information about active shooters. And over in Troup County, school leaders there addressed the uptick in threats at a news conference Wednesday night. They say they've investigated 4 separate threats of violence against their schools since the Appalachia school shooting, and one of those threats, they say, resulted in an arrest.
These threats have caused a disruption of learning and unnecessary distractions. I want to be very, very clear. These actions are not going to be tolerated by our school system or by law enforcement.
That is Dr. Richard Hazel, by the way.
And in Gwinnett County, the FBI says at least 9 students have been taken into custody for making threats at schools, many of them now facing criminal charges. And across the board, what we've heard from these school leaders and school officials is that they are going to be taking these very seriously. There will be consequences if any student makes a threat, and possible criminal charges, as we have already seen. So obviously something that the school officials are saying that you should talk to your students and your children about as well. That's the latest here live in downtown Atlanta. I'm Brooks Honor for Good Day Atlanta.
Getting back to John Burns' pitch for some additional policy here. Remember, he said he proposes increasing penalties for threats against schools, saying that he wants to crack down on copycat threats seen since the shooting. Criminal penalties would apply only to those charged as adults, and most threat makers have been arrested as juveniles, which you heard in the Fox 5 piece. So what are you going to do with juveniles? Charge them as adults? Finally, Burns said House Republicans would again promote safe firearm storage. Wait, what is this again? What is this again business? That's not something that they've actually, like they entertained a subcommittee hearing with Representative Dr. Michelle Au's safe storage bill. But what is this about again promoting safe fire? The House passed legislation this year to create a state income tax credit of up to $300 for the purchase of gun safes, trigger locks, other security devices, or the costs of courses on safe firearms handling. The Senate preferred a bill exempting gun safes and other safety devices from state sales tax. Both bills failed after the chambers couldn't agree. Both GOP-led chambers, by the way. Democrats gained little traction on legislation that would have created a misdemeanor crime for negligently failing to secure firearms accessed by children. Representative Dr. Michelle Au, a Johns Creek Democrat, has promised to bring back that measure. The speaker said he's open to other proposals, saying the House will, quote, examine every reasonable idea and solution to protect and defend the most vulnerable among us, our children, while also protecting the right and privilege of our citizens to protect their families and property. Burns argued that previous school safety efforts reduced the toll at Appalachia, helping pay for wearable panic buttons that alerted authorities and school resource officers who responded. State lawmakers and Kemp earlier approved multiple rounds of one-time security grants totaling $184 million. Finally, the article wraps. The budget that began July 1st includes more than $100 million in ongoing funding, enough to provide $47,000 a year to each public school for safety. So that would be like a resource officer salary, right? Schools can use that for chosen security purposes, though Kemp has said he wanted it to help underwrite a security officer for each school. Well, I guess correctly. Back after this, The Ron Show, America One Radio, and Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Final segment of The Ron Show, and while we're talking about some elements of racism that still manage to reveal themselves in our political discourse, it's time to have a conversation about one such element that Senate Democrats came together yesterday on the steps of the Capitol to address, and that would be the filibuster. I'm going to give you a taste of that press conference that included some statements from Georgia's Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock.
Good afternoon. My name is Maya Wiley. I am the president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, the nation's oldest, the nation's largest, the nation's baddest civil rights coalition in this nation. We turn 75 years next year. And I say that because we stand here wondering how we are going to save our democracy as a country, but we at the Leadership Conference, we with our over 200 national organizational members, many of whom are here today, we with our allies, our elected leaders who know and understand what democracy looks like, what it looks like to make sure that people decide who lead us, who know and understand that democracy is about the fair and just access to the ballot box, that democracy has always been born of struggle. It is not a promise. It is a commitment. And in 1965, when this powerful coalition won passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it was not given to us. It was demanded by us, we the people. And we stand here today knowing that people, our voters, will decide the outcome of this election as we go into debate night. But we also stand here to say we know that the future is on the ballot. And while we will not tell voters who to vote for, we will always remind voters what to vote about. And that is to keep money out of our politics so that people decide. That means to say that politicians can't get between us and the ballot box because they don't like how they think we might vote. Because right now we are seeing that our people, all people, every nation, everyone in this nation, every race, every class, every community is standing up for freedom. And freedom ain't free. Freedom is a fight. Freedom is about good trouble, like John R. Lewis has always reminded us. And so I am going to step aside so that we, the people, can also hear from our elected leaders, allies who know, who understand what it means to have a democracy. And I will say this. We are here today because we know that we will win a package of legislation, a package that is a pro-democracy package, that is the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, that is the Freedom to Vote Act, that is the Native American Voting Rights Act, that is D.C. statehood, and that stands up to say, no racist segregation era rule rigging in the Senate will stop us from making sure we have all our freedoms. Not just freedom to vote, but freedom for what we vote for. Like our right to choose when and how we have a family, our right to decide what books we read, and our right to say that it is we who decide our identities and no one else. So with that, it is my great honor and privilege to first introduce to you Senator Warnock from the great state of Georgia.
A vote is a kind of prayer for the world we desire for ourselves and for our children. And our prayers are stronger than when we pray together. Thank you all so very much for being here as a United States Senator from the great state of Georgia and as Congressman John Lewis's pastor. I had to be here today to stand with you because voting rights is always a top priority for me. I know that an election is around the corner, but there is no more important issue in a democracy than the health of the democracy itself. There's no more important issue in an election than the ability of the people to participate in the election and to ensure that the voices of every eligible American can be heard. Voting rights, succinctly put, are preservative of all other rights. And so this work is vital. This work is so very critical. Last Friday night, I had the sad duty of traveling to Winder, Georgia. Small town in Georgia. I was standing out on a field on a Friday night in small town Georgia, a light rain falling.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was on that field, I was thinking we should be at a football game tonight.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in high school, Friday nights are for football. But instead of cheering on their classmates, these young people sadly were standing there mourning their classmates and two very, very committed educators. Now, why am I mentioning that issue as we're talking about voting? Because it is one more example of the ways in which voting rights are preservative of all other rights. We are seeing increasingly a yawning chasm between what the people want and what they are able to get out of their democracy. This ongoing travesty of justice where gun rights and gun safety are concerned is an example of the ways in which the democracy itself is imperiled. According to a Fox News poll, and you won't hear me say that often.
Right.
But according to a Fox News poll, 87% of Americans want to see universal background checks. That means Democrats and Republicans, our differences notwithstanding, Americans, ordinary people, not politicians, but ordinary people, normal people, see this issue. And they see plainly that we ought to have universal background checks, for example. That you can't say that it's not people it's guns, it's people who kill people, not guns. And then not want to know who the people are. Well, why are we stuck? We are stuck on this issue and on reproductive choice and on a whole range of issues because of the outsized impact of corporate interests in our politics, because of the control of money in our politics, because of racial and partisan gerrymandering, which makes state houses look very different from the way people actually vote.
Like here in Georgia.
And ensures that politicians are only concerned about somebody being more extreme than them. And so we've got to give the people their voices back. We've got to get the people their democracy back. Voting rights are preservative of all other rights. How else do you explain 87% of agreement among Americans on any issue and no movement?
Bingo.
We can't even get a debate in the United States Senate on background checks in spite of the agreement among everyday Americans. And so this is work that we have to do. We have to remain loud on this issue. We can't quiet down, not even for a moment. And that's why I'm glad to stand with you in advancing the importance of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act to ensure that we pass the Freedom to Vote Act, two bills that would not only protect the right to vote, but strengthen voting rights and voting access for every eligible American. So nothing, absolutely nothing could be more important. We've got to save the framework in which we get to fight for everything else that matters. I believe that democracy is the political enactment of a spiritual idea. This idea that all of us have within us a spark of the divine, that we are a reflection of God's glory and greatness, and therefore we ought to have a voice in the future of our country and our destiny within it. We stand united in our absolute commitment to advance that work and to preserve it for our children.
And there you go, Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock. I'll share that entire press conference in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. That's why down-ballot races are just as important as the presidential. That's going to do it for The Ron Show. Replay 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio, 7 to 8 p.m. at Progressive Voices via TuneIn, and, of course, via podcast. Back tomorrow. Have a great day. We'll see you then.